It took me almost 6 years to realize I didn't really know the man I was living with. I don't mean that in a dramatic, movie-thriller kind of way. He wasn't a serial killer or anything like that. But in a different sense, maybe a scarier one, he had this whole other world I wasn't part of. And I mean completely not part of. I'd walk past the room where he spent his evenings, hear sounds that didn't quite match the explanation he gave, and yet I never thought to dig deeper. That's on me, I guess. I wanted to believe the version of him that I had in front of me, the version that made breakfast on Sundays, rubbed my back when I had migraines, and laughed with my mom on the phone like he'd known her his whole life. We met in the most average way possible, through mutual friends at a housewarming party in Chicago. I was 27. He was 29. I remember noticing how quiet he was at first, not shy, but like he was always observing more than speaking. He had this calm energy that made people trust him. That night, he told me he worked in software security, penetration testing, specifically. I remember laughing when he explained it, because I made some dumb joke about the word of penetration, and he didn't even flinch. Just smirked and said, "You wouldn't be the first one." We started dating casually, nothing too intense at first. I'd just gotten out of something messy and wasn't looking for anything deep, and he seemed respectful of that. But he grew on me, slowly. Not flashy, not love-bombing, just consistently there. When I got laid off from my job 6 months later, he was the one who brought over groceries and stayed until I felt like a human again. A year in, we moved in together. His name is Evan. I'm writing this now because I feel like I'm trying to make sense of something that still doesn't sit right. I'm not even sure what I'm accusing him of, if anything. But what happened between us, what he hid from me, shook something fundamental in the way I see people. It started small, like these things always do. Evan had a home office, and I never really went into it. Not because it was off limits, he never said that, but because he was one of those needs his cave kind of guys. He worked remotely, had a standing desk set up, some weird ultra-wide monitor, and this tangle of wires that looked like a fire hazard waiting to happen. I work in HR for a healthcare company and mostly from the kitchen table, so our setups were night and day. I respected his space. At night, especially during the colder months, he'd retreat to that room after dinner. I'd hear him talking sometimes, but figured it was Zoom calls or whatever dev stuff he was into. Once or twice I peeked in and saw him with headphones on, typing furiously, sometimes smiling, sometimes looking dead serious. He always minimized the screen when I entered. Not suspiciously fast, just casual. Like he was in the zone and didn't want to break concentration. I'm not proud to admit this, but I barely questioned it. Evan always struck me as one of the most emotionally stable people I knew. He didn't blow up during fights. He didn't manipulate. He didn't love bomb or stonewall. He was just, or balanced. And that made me trust him more than I probably should have. But then things started getting weird. It began with a package. A long, flat box, delivered to our doorstep on a rainy Tuesday in March. I was working from home that day, and since Evan had taken the car to a co-working space, I brought it inside. It had no return address, just a printed label with his name. Out of habit, I shook it gently. It felt heavy, like it had metal inside. When Evan got home later that night, he saw it on the table and froze for a second before picking it up and heading straight into the office without a word. No joke. Didn't even say hi. I waited a few minutes, then walked over and knocked. He opened the door just enough to poke his head out and said, Thanks for bringing that in. Just some gear I ordered for project. What kind of project? I asked, casually. He paused for a beat. Stuff for a side hobby, nothing major. That was the first time I felt it. That twinge in the pit of my stomach. Not quite alarm, but the kind of tension you get when something doesn't fit. Over the next few weeks, he got more secretive. Locked the office more often. Started wearing noise-cancelling headphones even when I was home. I chalked it up to work stress, maybe burnout. We were in year 5 of our relationship at that point. I figured things just settle into weird rhythms sometimes. Then one night, he forgot to log out of his laptop. I wasn't snooping. Honestly, I was just cleaning the living room and saw it sitting open on the couch. I figured I'd close it for him so it wouldn't overheat. But then I saw the screen. There was a browser window open to some kind of live streaming platform. Not Twitch, not YouTube. Something I'd never heard of. And in the stream thumbnail was a room that looked exactly like our office. Same desk. Same monitor. Same lighting. And in the middle of the frame was Evan. Wearing a mask. I stared at it for a long time, not really understanding what I was looking at. It wasn't sexual or violent. It was just him, talking, to the camera. To an audience I couldn't see. The mask he wore was strange, like a hyper-realistic silicone face, but with exaggerated features. Cartoonish, almost. Like a caricature of a generic man. The title of the stream was Father's Hour, session number 243. I clicked on it. And what I heard chilled me. Evan, masked, composed, oddly gentle, was reading what sounded like a bedtime story. But it wasn't for kids. It was about them. About a parenting techniques. About a discipline theory. At first it sounded like some weird performance art or satire, but the more I listened, the more it unsettled me. He was taking on this role, a character, almost, who believed in strict, old-school parenting. But it was layered in metaphor. He used phrases like emotional compliance, a ritualistic correction, and a domestic hierarchy. It was like he was playing some twisted version of a 1950s father figure, talking to an invisible family. And people were watching. Dozens, maybe hundreds, judging by the chat replay on the side. Most messages were supportive. Some thanked him. One said, tonight's message really hit home. You helped me feel seen. I shut the laptop and sat back like I'd been slapped. What the hell was I looking at? I didn't confront him that night. Or the next. I didn't even know what to say. What was this? Some kind of kink? Performance art? A commentary on toxic masculinity? A breakdown in real time? I started digging. The platform was called Echo Stage, an invite-only streaming site for a niche psychological content. I found that phrase on their About page. Evan had a whole channel. Over 200 archived streams. Some of them had been going back years. And the mask? It had a name, the Patriarch. He wasn't just streaming. He'd built a persona. A whole mythos. There were community forums, transcripts, even fan theories about who he really was. Some thought he was an ex-pastor. Others thought it was satire. A few believed he was an AI. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I couldn't believe the man who made me lemon tea when I was sick, who cried when our cat died, who held my hand during my miscarriage, had this other life. Eventually, I confronted him. I waited until the weekend. I didn't want to blow up in the middle of the work week, risk him shutting down and disappearing into that office again. I needed answers, not excuses. We were sitting on the couch Saturday morning, just finished coffee. I turned to him and said, as calmly as I could, can we talk about the mask? At first, he looked confused. Then, when he realized what I meant, he stiffened. His fingers curled slightly around his mug. You opened my laptop, he said flatly. I did, I replied. And I saw the stream. I saw you. I heard what you were saying. Evan, what the hell is Father's Hour? He didn't speak right away. I could see the war going on behind his eyes. Defensiveness, calculation, maybe even shame. Then he said something I wasn't ready for. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, because right now, I don't even know who I've been living with. He sighed and set down his mug. It started as a project during grad school. He began. Just an experiment. I was writing a thesis on online identity, how anonymity lets people process unresolved trauma. I created a character, the Patriarch, to explore the psychology of traditional masculinity. I didn't think anyone would actually watch. But then it kind of took off. Took off? I repeated. Evan, you've been streaming for years. You have followers. Forums. People dissecting your philosophy. This isn't a side hobby. This is a whole life you've been hiding. I didn't hide it, he said, too quickly. I just never brought it up. Because it's weird. I know it is. And I didn't want you to look at me differently. That hit hard. Because the truth was, I was looking at him differently. I didn't even know if I could go back to seeing him the same way again. But what is it, Evan? I asked. Is it performance? Therapy? Some kind of fetish? He rubbed his temples. It's not sexual. At least, not for me. I can't speak for the people who watch. But for me, it's about control. Stability. Structure. It started after my dad died. I realized I'd never really processed the way he raised me. I was trying to recreate that framework, exaggerate it, externalize it, turn it into something I could look at and understand. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to believe him. That this was some twisted form of self-therapy. But another part was screaming. He lied. 4 years, and he still wouldn't have told you if you hadn't found out. The next few weeks were quiet. He kept his streams private. Password protected. Stopped locking the door, but I didn't go in either. The air between us was heavy. We still talked. Still shared meals. But something fundamental had cracked. Then, one night in June, I got a message on Instagram. It was from a private account with no profile picture. Just a few words. Does he tell you what he says off camera? I froze. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the screen, rereading it over and over. My heart was pounding in my ears. When I finally replied, all I said was, what do you mean? They sent back a video. It was a clip. Less than a minute. Grainy audio. Evan's voice, but deeper, more intense. And in it, he was saying things that chilled me to the bone. Not violent. Not illegal. But deeply unsettling. He was talking about obedience. About how certain bonds must be formed through ritual, not affection. He used the phrase corrective ownership. It wasn't him, and yet it was. I showed it to him that night. He didn't deny it. I went too far in some of the early sessions, he admitted. I was testing boundaries. Seeing how far the persona could go before it broke. But why? Why push that far? Because people were listening. And some of them were broken. They needed structure. They needed a figure to believe in. And I gave them that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're not a therapist, Evan. You're not a pastor. You're a guy playing a part. And you don't know what your words are doing to these people. He nodded slowly. You're right. I didn't expect him to agree. And honestly, I didn't know what to do with that. I've been thinking about shutting it down, he said. For a while now. It stopped feeling like therapy and started feeling like manipulation. That word stuck with me. Manipulation. Because that's what I've been feeling too. Not just about the stream, but about our whole relationship. What else had he curated? What else had he constructed to make himself feel in control? I moved out a month later. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I didn't feel safe in the not knowing. And that's the thing I've learned since all this happened. Sometimes the person you trust most isn't dangerous, or cruel, or evil, just unknowable. And that's enough to break everything. We still talk, sometimes. He sends me links to articles. I send him photos of my new apartment. But we're not what we were. We never will be. And I think I'm finally okay with that.